Here is a summary of what has happened so far. In the previous 6 chapters, Gillig the Otter explored the lake cavern underneath Cotir Castle while being pursued by Gloomer, and worked his way to the stairway leading up into the castle. In Chapter 7, Gillig entered the dungeons of Cotir Castle, only to overhear the conversation of Queen Sarmina's captives before he found his way into the larder. Gillig spent untold time in the cavern below, just waiting for his chance to enter the castle unseen and continue his search for the Scroll of Inheritance. In the current chapter of the adventure, Gillig had solved Verduga's riddle after defeating Gloomer in battle. Chapter 9. Triumphant. The cavern had flooded completely, and Gillig was being buffeted about in the dark, cold water. He concentrated on holding his breath. Fresh air. Just one breath, he wished. One lungful of good, clean air. He had to find his way out, and soon. Straining to see, nothing was visible, and the awful darkness was unbroken. He swam up a ways in the water. It was still cold, but not nearly as fierce as before. Straining to see, nothing was visible. He swam up a ways in the water. It was still cold, but not nearly as fierce as before. A badger lord appeared in Gillig's thoughts, his soft voice like the whisper of an owl's wing-beat in the night sky, proclaiming that you have earned the achievement title of Persistent Otter. Straining to see, nothing was visible, and the awful darkness was unbroken. He swam up and hit his head on the cavern roof. Gillig was under water. Within the dark water, Gillig felt a number of small holes spread about the ceiling of the cavern. Suddenly, a strong pull of water sent him upward into a hole a bit smaller than himself. Gillig was stuck and unable to move. Bubbles of air were slowly starting to escape from his mouth. He had been under water far too long. Fresh air. Just one breath, he wished. One lungful of good, clean air. Gillig squirmed, shook, wiggled, jiggled, and twisted as best his bulk would allow. Gillig twisted once more and was suddenly pushed free. The great force of the current dragged him upward violently. With a huge rush, accompanied by much barking and shouting, the otter broke the surface. Gillig lay floating on his back, coughing and gasping, gulping in vast quantities of clean, fresh air. Never again would he take such a wondrous gift for granted. Gathering his wits, he realized he was at the top of the dark space. Straining to see, nothing was visible, and the awful darkness was unbroken. Feeling about, Gillig realized he was floating in a small air bubble. There was a rock roof above and water below. He could feel the current pulling at his rudder. Gillig had a thought, but he had no idea how to do it. He wanted to leave, but could not figure out how. Gillig swam around, enjoying himself in the water. Gillig knew how to use his other senses in the dark. Feeling about, Gillig realized he was floating in a small air bubble. There was a rock roof above and water below. He could feel the current pulling at him. He wanted to leave, but could not figure out how. Gillig swam down from the air bubble, and the current quickly caught him. The young otter was pushed up, down, and then up again, until he suddenly surfaced, finding himself in a dark tunnel on a slight incline. He climbed up in the darkness and felt around. In his amazement, he realized he was back in the bunny burrow of the abandoned halt. Gillig carefully began to make his way forward towards the drain cover. Behind him erupted a sudden splash and a deep inrush of air into hideous lungs. The monster rushed Gillig. The young otter made a mighty leap, barely dodging the oncoming claws at just the right moment. Gloomer had survived, and was in the bunny burrow with him. Gillig felt about, madly tossing whatever his paws could find at the beast. Gloomer swiped at him ferociously, ripping the hanging pouch containing the scroll off from Gillig's belt and sending the otter spinning into the wall. The water rat had full advantage over Gillig in the darkness. The great rat had no need of light to find him. Reacting quickly, Gillig dove towards the hatch and leaped in, pulling it into the locked position behind him. The snarls of the horrid beast rang out as he banged on the hatch cover in a maddened rage. Gillig swam back and made a dash out of the water. He cautiously felt his way in the darkness back into the sunlit entrance of the halt. After being buffeted about, he clutched the amulet which still hung around his neck, while he stopped to catch his breath. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of an ancient, ruined otter halt. From where he stood, the den looked completely abandoned and desolate. The den was lit by rays of bright sunlight that streamed in from the open entrance, thus causing the stirred-up dust motes to glow like strange fireflies. Hanging just outside the entrance and within reach was the end of the rope he had used to climb down into the decaying otter's den. There was a tall, unstable-looking pillar of rubble going up to the rocky ceiling. Located in plain view was a number of rubble-packed doorways which were impassable without the help of a mole. Yet there was one doorway which hadn't collapsed. It led into a dark, foreboding tunnel. The floor under his paws was made of solid rock. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig considered going back into the dark sections of the halt. He needed to get back into the bunny burrow, but without a source of light, Gloomer would make short work of him. Gillig decided to concentrate his efforts in the lighted entranceway, hoping he would be able to find something that may be of use. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig closely examined the rock, finding it to be nothing but a smooth stone. He tucked it away, disappointed it had not been flint. If it were, he could have used it to strike a fire for his torch. He eyed the rubble all about the entrance of the halt. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig looked at the rubble, and saw it was filled with rocks and wood scraps. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig collected some wood scraps from the rubble. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig checked his belongings, and noted he was carrying a small, smooth rock, a bunch of wood scraps, a sling, a ring of assorted keys, a fire-starting kit. Around his neck was the amulet he had found in the chest. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig dropped all the wood scraps he had collected back into the rubble. He eyed the rubble all about the entrance of the halt. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig collected some wood scraps from the rubble. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. He wanted to look at something, but it was either not visible to him, or he could not find anything about it. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. He tried to take something, but he was not able to get it. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig thought about leaving via the rope, but he could not face Skipper without completing his mission. He had come so far already. He was no longer afraid of the water rat. If he could get the Gloomer into the light, he would be able to finally defeat the monster and retrieve the pouch with the scroll of inheritance. He eyed the rubble all about the entrance of the halt. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig tossed the rock away. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig picked up a nearby rock from the rubble. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig was ready to light the torch, but realized there wasn't an unlit torch anywhere nearby. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. Gillig considered going back into the dark sections of the Holt. He needed to get back into the bunny burrow, but without a source of light, Gloomer would make short work of him. Gillig decided to concentrate his efforts in the lighted entranceway, hoping he would be able to find something that may be of use. He eyed the rubble all about the entrance of the Holt. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the Holt. Gillig dug around, scattering the rubble about. His face lit up, astonished by the sight of another old torch, which had held itself together. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the Holt. Gillig took everything from the fire-starting kit and lit the torch. After doing so, the remaining bits of the kit were finally used up. As soon as the torch flared, Gillig heard a thump behind him. There were more thumps from the dark ceiling, which slowly reached a crescendo. Turning in horror, he saw he was no longer alone. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of an ancient, ruined Otterholt. From where he stood, the den looked completely abandoned and desolate. The den was lit by rays of bright sunlight that streamed in from the open entrance, thus causing the stirred-up dust motes to glow like strange fireflies. Hanging just outside the entrance and within reach was the end of the rope he had used to climb down into the decaying otter's den. There was a tall, unstable-looking pillar of rubble going up to the rocky ceiling. An entire den of snakes was making its way towards Gillig with a chorus of hisses.
Food has come to light. Food has come to light. Food has come to light.
He saw a number of rubble-packed doorways which were impassable without the help of a mole. Yet there was one doorway which hadn't collapsed. It led into a dark, foreboding tunnel. Gillig fled with his lit torch in hand from the snakes through the dark tunnel. Dashing back into the fire pit room, he held himself to the wall by the fire pit. The otter was breathing heavily, waiting for the pit of snakes to appear.
Snakes? Why did it have to be snakes?
He muttered between gasps. Gillig remained still, waiting in anticipation of their pursuit. But it seemed they were not going to brave the dark tunnel to come after him. Gillig was in a large cavernous hall filled with rubble. Nearby was the twisty tunnel that led back to the entrance and a bubbling spring streaming into a short tunnel. Gillig strained his eyes in the darkness, but could only see a little above his head on the walls by the light of the flickering torch. Just barely visible, scratched above on a wall, was a riddle. Playful otters we may be, but fighters fierce upon the sea. Clang the target up above, to find the fun that otters love. Strangely, there was no target in sight. Visible was a ring of stones around a blackened pit. Gillig dropped the wood scraps he was carrying into the fire-blackened pit. Gillig was in a large open area with many interesting features. Gillig tossed the torch into the fire pit and stood back as the fire roared to life. He was in a large cavernous hall filled with rubble. Bright light glowed around the room as the firelight flickered and danced in the fire pit. Nearby was the twisty tunnel that led back to the entrance, and a bubbling spring streaming into a short tunnel. High above the fully exposed riddle was a small round target. Down to the rabbits we will go, through the bunny burrow below. They flee from us and hide their food, but we'll bring 'em for hullabaloo. Playful otters we may be, but fighters fierce upon the sea. Clang the target up above to find the fun that otters love. Located in plain view was a fire pit with a burning fire in it. Gillig could not take his mind off the meaning of the riddle. His eyes furrowed at the memory of the day before. At the first light of dawn, Skipper met with Gonf and Gillig. "Gonf, this here is Gillig, the otter
Hi! Pleased to meet you, matey."
Gonf excitedly shook Gillig's paw. The young otter gave a bewildered look to Skipper, who merely laughed. "Now why don't you tell the lad what you told me?" The mouse balladeer quickly responded in song.
"The Prince of Mouse Thieves knows a way to get into Cotier today. The Gloomer who's guarded it so, no longer a reason not to go. Within the abandoned hold you'll take a slide to depths, direct to lake. Oh, just find the otter's bunny burrow and you'll know what to do."
The mouse thief grinned from ear to ear. Gillig shook himself free of his thoughts of the past. He suddenly jumped, realizing perhaps he could find the bunny burrow the mouse thief had sung about, and maybe even the scroll itself. Gillig loaded a smooth pebble into the sling and was ready to fire it. With a stone in his sling, Gillig shot at the target, hitting it perfectly in the center. The stone ricocheted off with a clang and landed in the rubble. A heavy thump sounded in his ears, erupting from the short tunnel. Gloomer came roaring into the fire pit room. His nose twitched as he sought about for Gillig. From the twisty tunnel, the nest of snakes moved swiftly, hissing into the area where they spied Gloomer. With a mad dash, the snakes and Gloomer met by the stream in the short tunnel and began to fight. Gillig was in a large open area with many interesting features. Gloomer and the snakes were battling in front of the short tunnel. The great rat swung his mighty claws at his attackers. The snakes swayed their heads, mouths open, fangs bared dangerously, hissing their challenge. Neither side was prevailing. Gillig picked up a nearby rock from the rubble. Gillig was in a large open area with many interesting features. Gloomer and the snakes were battling in front of the short tunnel. Gillig loaded a smooth pebble into the sling and was ready to fire it. Gillig took careful aim at Gloomer and whirled his sling. As the rock released, he erupted, surprising even himself, with a mighty cry.
"Moss flower!"
The stone flew true and hit Gloomer in the head, knocking the beast to the ground. The resilient monster began to struggle to his feet, but before he could rise, the snakes were upon him. Gloomer flailed as he tried to fight off the serpents. However, he was far outnumbered and succumbed to the onslaught of the myriad snakes, disappearing beneath a sea of hisses. With Gloomer having met his demise, the snakes suddenly turned their attention to Gillig. One snake reared up, flickering a slim tongue.
Food has come to light.
They began to slither towards him. Gillig was in a large open area with many interesting features. A large nest of serpents slithered towards Gillig. With the snakes vastly outnumbering him, Gillig knew he would not stand a chance. He had to flee. Gillig was in a large open area with many interesting features. A large nest of serpents slithered towards Gillig. He tried to go, but it was either not visible or not reachable from where he was. He was in a large cavernous hall filled with rubble. Bright light glowed around the room as the firelight flickered and danced in the fire pit. Nearby was the twisty tunnel that led back to the entrance, and he was in front of a twisty tunnel. The only thing that remained was to enter it. Gillig tried to get into the short tunnel so he could return to the bunny burrow for the scroll. His pursuers blocked him from proceeding, backing him towards the twisty tunnel. Gillig was in a large open area with many interesting features. A large nest of serpents slithered towards Gillig. Gillig tried to get into the short tunnel so he could return to the bunny burrow for the scroll. His pursuers blocked him from proceeding, backing him towards the twisty tunnel. Gillig entered the twisty tunnel. Gillig was in a twisty tunnel lined with rubble. At one end, the tunnel ended at a wide open space, and the other way went back to the entrance. A large nest of serpents slithered towards Gillig. Gillig carefully made his way back out of the tunnel to the brightly lit entrance of the halt. Gillig was in the entrance chamber of the halt. A large nest of serpents slithered towards Gillig. Gillig grabbed the rope and looked one last time back into the halt. The snakes were almost upon him, and he alone could not defeat them all. His paws clenched the rope as he began to hastily climb upward. The chorus of hisses began to slowly fade as he ascended. Upon reaching the top of the dry riverbed, he pulled the rope up so no wandering vermin might discover the secret below. Gillig fastened the rope around his shoulder. The scroll was still waiting there, trapped in the hold and waiting to be recovered. A badger lord suddenly manifested in his thoughts, as if some sort of dreamlike state. He spoke ever so softly, and declared that you have earned the achievement title of Otter Warrior. Epilogue. The fire roared brightly at Camp Willow. Woodlanders and Otterfolk were celebrating their victory over Cotir. Martin the warrior had slain the wildcat queen Sarmina, and Mossflower was now free of her and the Thousand-Eye army. The crew of otters gathered around Gillig as he told his tale, not leaving out a single moment, spinning a story worthy of Goth as he recounted finding his way into the Bunny Burrow, the wonders of the Mushroom Cave, manoeuvring his way across the tightrope, hiding from the Wildcat Queen, and ultimately fighting the snakes and escaping the Gloomer once and for all.
But I lost the scroll, Skipper.
Root gave Gillig a hearty clap on the back and laughed boisterously.
That old thing? Oh, those vermin. What a bunch of blunderers. I could throw one of them further than they could hurl their own spears.
Skipper put a paw around Gillig's shoulders. Wipe that glum look from your face, me hearty. You may not have that piece of paper to show for your troubles, but look here. Skipper led him over to the waterside and pointed at his reflection. Aye, that's the make of a true otter. Well done, matey. 'Tis only a memory of you afeared by snakes. Take a good look. Why, you're almost as big as me. Skipper flexed with his powerful limbs. Gillig put a paw over his mouth to stifle a laugh. Skipper smiled as he patted Gillig. Float me tail. A flagon of me famous hot root punch will patch you up in a brace of shakes. What do you think? Gillig nodded gratefully and followed Skipper. But as they approached the rest of the crew, he hesitated.
But I didn't get the scroll, so that means I'm not a part of the crew anymore. Right?
Well now, why don't we see what the rest of the crew thinks? Skipper and Gillig turned around to see the entire crew of otters staring at them in silence. What say you, lads? Is he deserving of more waters with us?
He handled the Gloomer all by himself for months.
And made a bunch of snakes look like they was bitty worms.
He even got me prize sling back.
Root stepped forward and gave a broad wink.
I think this one is more than worthy of the crew.
The burly otter hefted Gillig onto his shoulders with ease. All the otters began to cheer.
Whoopery-hoo! 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 Whoopery-hoo!
Credits: Soma Games LLC, the Redwall Abbey Company, Penguin Random House UK. Developed by Cloppus LLC. Cloppus LLC. Game Design Team. David Ababio. Jacob Klein. Melchiah Mork. Michael Herrera. Scott Adams. Game Development Team. Eddie Johnson. Jacob Klein. Nathan Johnson. Intern. Scott Adams. Keyman. Ronald Moraga. Narrative Design Team. David Ababio. Lead. Rachel Johnson. Student Writer. Kendall Miller. Intern. Production Assistant. Alyssa McGaw. Programming Team. Jacob Klein. Jeremy Rako. Melchiah Mork. Scott Adams. Cloppus Executive Team. Chief Executive Officer, Scott Adams. Chief Operations Officer, Roxanne Adams. Community Manager, Michael Herrera. Operations Assistant, April Way. Vice President, David Ababio. Cloppus Special Mentions, Gillig Stand-In, Cinnamon the Loyal. Tarmina Stand-In, Cleocatra the Crafty. Gloomer Stunts, Reginald Rodent. Stormfin, His Fishy Self. Soma Games LLC. Publicity, John Bergquist. Producer, Randy Bruin. Producer, Chris Skaggs. Assistant Director, Austin Schmidt. Icon Artist, Erin Marintet. Music and Sound Effects, James Marintet. Production Assistant, Sammy Riff. Production Assistant, Emily Adams. Game Design Consultant, Brandon Simmons. Background Artist, Jared Shear. UI Artist, Peter Venoy Jr. Trailer Design, M. Joshua Caller. Voice Actors, Narrator, Malk Williams. Gillig the Otter, Joshua Cookingham. Skipper, Malk Williams. Gonf, the Prince of Mouse Thieves, Richard Reed. Martin the Warrior, Austin Schmidt. Root the Otter, David Lowe. Ferdy the Hedgehog, Hannah Tuttle. Cogs the Hedgehog, Michael Slusser. Tarmina the Ruthless, Stephanie Tobin. Gingerveer the Forgotten, Sam A. Mowry. Chib the Robin, Madeline Slusser. Weasel Dungeon Guard 1, Alexander Doddy. Weasel Dungeon Guard 2, Carla Mack. Weasel Guard 1, Lizzie Hof. Weasel Guard 2, Alexander Wilson. Weasel Guard 3, Dominic Tuttle. Weasel Larderguard sings, Carla Mack. Otter Crew Member 1, Jason Cates Cheverst. Otter Crew Member 2, Chris Skaggs. Otter Crew Member 3, Michael Slusser. Otter Crew Member 4, Andy Smith. Snakes, Kaylee Bray. Playtesters, Aaron Ababio, Michael Ababio, Rachel Ababio, Hannah Adelance, Janet Adelance, Danny Adams, Katie Adams, Sam Adams, Elijah Bansley, Charles Collette, Peter Collette, Anja Custer, Clay Custer, Naomi Custer, Titus Custer, Rachel Day, Aisha Durst, Tim Durst, Scott Elliott, Martin Gallagher, Hannah Helwig, Whitney Helwig, William Nye Euler, Stephanie Phipps, Ryan Pink, Brad Rako, Mike Schulte, and Porter Way, and all those who played the demos at PlatCon, GDC, and CGDC. Special thanks to Emma Topping and Charlie Moore. Credits music, Escape the Gloomer extended theme, The Lost Legends of Redwall, Escape the Gloomer, Soma Games LLC, the Redwall Abbey Company Limited, and the Random House Group Limited. 2018, all rights reserved. The Redwall Abbey Company Limited is the owner of the rights, copyrights and trademarks for Redwall, Brian Jakes, and the characters, their names, and the settings relating to the Redwall books. All rights reserved.
Hey, now what's that glowing thing around your neck?
Gillig looked down at the amulet still hung around his neck. It was glowing oddly from the flickering light of the fire. Jumping down from Root's shoulders, he quickly pulled off the amulet and held it up to the firelight. Brilliance shone through the numerous glittering emeralds. The otters gasped and murmured amongst themselves as they moved out of the way. Below, in the patch of sand that had been cleared, the shadows cast from cuts in the gems aligned, revealing a map detailed across the beach. The clamour of the crew reached a crescendo as they examined the glowing pinpoints dotted along the paths of the map. Skipper put his arms around Gillig's shoulders. "Strike me rudder, matey! It looks just like mossflower. But over yonder there." Skipper pointed a paw to an unfamiliar corner of the map where a large eye was detailed. Beside it, in a careful scrawl, was another riddle. "Beyond the green my keepers await, hearts which failed at the mountain of heat. If my ultimate treasure is your fate, then my eye you must meet." After which strange characters followed. A form much like that of the first section of the riddle, but was in a language unlike anything the otters had ever seen before. Verduga, Lord of Kotir. At the sight of the name at the bottom, Gillig turned to Skipper, flashing a grin that caused the older otter to let out a boisterous laugh. The young otter did not leave the halt with empty paws. A great adventure was ready to begin. A badger lord appeared in his mind, his voice soft like the whisper of an owl's wingbeat in the night sky, proclaiming that you have earned the achievement title of Coming Attractions. Game over. Congratulations. You are a true champion. Thank you so much for playing Escape the Gloomer, and be sure to read Mossflower and the rest of the Redwall series for more adventures in the grand world of Redwall.